Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Wall. Today, we investigate the topic of compassion and what it means for us in day-to-day life. In particular, what it means with respect to caring for ourselves and others. The most common accepted components of compassion are an emotional response or concern, a cognitive response or perception of suffering, and a motivational response, which is the desire to see the suffering relieved. Now, you may have also heard of the term empathy. Well, empathy generally precedes compassion and is the ability to understand what the other person is feeling, see things from their point of view, and perhaps even see yourself in their situation without necessarily desiring to do something about it. Well, this has been a big area of research, and using functional MRIs, scientists have demonstrated that when you have empathy, it activates the pain center in our brain. So in other words, you feel pain. Now, when you take action, it activates a different part of your brain called the reward center. So empathy can hurt, while compassion can heal. It's the motivation to go beyond merely empathizing and see pain diminished or that suffering relieved, and that distinguishes compassion from empathy. Now, in 2018, a book called Compassionomics, The Revolutionary Scientific Evidence That Caring Makes a Difference, was published. This book was based on a 2-year journey and a large systematic review of literature talking about compassion in healthcare. This research showed that compassion has a direct, undeniable impact on health outcomes of patients, burnout in practitioners, and cost reduction in the healthcare system. Compassion is a skill, not a trait. So for most of us, it can actually be taught. It's good for both our physical and mental health, and it helps us feel good, contributes to our happiness, and provides a sense of purpose and meaning in our life. So today we explore compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, a professor, researcher, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She explains the nature of compassion, our ability to learn how to be more compassionate, its potential impacts on our personal health, and how we can build a more compassionate community. Let's check it out. Hi, Dr. Scully. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike, and thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah.
It's an interesting topic today. We're going to talk about compassion, but before we get into that, can you tell me a bit about your background?
Yeah, well, I have one sister, and we reckon we were pretty lucky. We were adopted by a very lovely family in North Dublin, and around I was about 5. My family moved to live in a really pretty place called Howth. So if you're ever going to Ireland, I recommend a trip to Howth, a really pretty place. So we had no money and lots of fun, and things were good until 1969, when an absolutely brutal sectarian war started. Class war broke out again in Ireland. So officially the war was happening in Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, so a separate country, but it's actually a very small place. And I stand to be corrected here, but I would say like Dublin to Belfast is probably like St. John's to Goobies or something, maybe even shorter. And I went to medical school from high school, which was the typical thing then in 1973. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So that was right in the midst of all this awful stuff going on, sort of like what's happening in Ethiopia now or Ukraine. There was all this dreadful stuff going on kind of around the corner.
Right. And then you became a physician and you ended up in Newfoundland.
Yes. Initially in Ireland, I did both internal medicine and pediatrics, which you actually couldn't really do now. And I ended up being interested in hematology. And I came to Canada actually to train at the Hospital for Sick Children, planning to go back and as a children's cancer specialist. And then I met my husband, and he was originally my late husband, and he was originally from Vietnam. So I trained in hematology, he trained in infectious diseases, and we trained in Montreal. I was at Queen's and at McGill, University of Montreal, and then he took a position in St. John, New Brunswick.
Okay.
And that's where we started. And then we both took positions here in 1997. So we've been here ever since.
That's great. So how did you become interested in compassion? I know that, being a physician is very compassionate in nature, but you took a very keen interest in it. How did that sort of come to be?
I think, like a lot of people, I ran into a very tough patch in my life. And actually, in 2016, I heard a CBC interview with Dr. Vincent Folletti, who's one of the main authors and investigators of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And I actually pulled my car over and took out a pen and paper and wrote down the names and so on, because I had never heard any of this. And I found it interesting because it's a very large study and there's a huge amount of publications. And I was like, wow, I've never heard of this. I started reading about this, and all the data is showing that adverse experiences actually affect our health, because I was not aware of this. I started studying how abuse and cruelty has been documented again and again to be extremely bad for our health. And midst of that, a close family member said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not agreeing with you. And it was true that this was very dark. So about January 27, I just Googled what is the opposite of a word. Yes. And the opposite to abuse is compassion. So I was like, okay, I'm going to see, is there any data on compassion? So that's actually how it started. Yeah.
Okay, so we know that compassion is kind of the opposite of abuse. Is that how you define it? And is there a difference between the words compassion, and it also comes to mind like empathy or altruism? Is there a difference between all that?
So they are all interrelated. Mm-hmm. And as I think you probably know, our brains are such that we do tend to focus on the negative, but we're also at our best when we focus on the positive. So a lot of people focus on if there's something negative happening in their lives or in society, they're sort of anti that. And yet there's more and more evidence that we're happier, and we're more effective when we're actually motivated from a positive space. So that was where I became interested in could focusing on compassion actually make a difference. There's a huge literature, but I think in a nutshell, what's best for us, best for our health and our well-being, is compassionate empathy. So we do need empathy as well, but empathy is the ability to understand other people's feelings. And so empathy, in some definitions, includes cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and empathy can go in different directions. So people can use cognitive empathy, understanding people, to be manipulative, which is not a healthy, good thing. So empathy, you do need empathy, and it's part of compassion, but it has to be this desire to help, right? And altruism is the pure desire to help, which is wonderful, that actually only 3% of human beings are physically capable of pure altruism, meaning physically capable of, in the moment, making a decision to lay down, to risk their own life for the sake of a stranger. That's a definition of altruism.
Totally. So I would summarize it maybe this way is the best, is that empathy is understanding people, altruism is sacrificing yourself, and compassion is taking that empathy and taking action to help people based on your understanding of them. Is that correct?
That is correct. But into all that, we're trying, like wisdom has to come into this. Like, you may have a strong desire to help people, but if you do it in a way that's reckless, you may hurt people and yourself. So there's a balance somewhere in all this. Yeah.
We see that sometimes in wellness, where people, have an attempt to help people, but they tend to give advice that may not be necessarily the best advice for people because they don't understand the full picture, which is the whole point of the show. Now, I've been doing some research on this and getting ready for our chat, and I came across something called the Charter of Compassion. Can you tell me about what this is?
Well, so when I put in compassion into Google, one of the first things that came up is the Charter of Compassion or Charter for Compassion. And so my understanding is that Karen Armstrong, who's a very brilliant British lady, won a TED Talk. I think it's probably over a decade ago now. And she was talking on how compassion is really fundamental to all different religious traditions. And she won a TED Talk, and she used that $100,000 to form this amazing Charter for Compassion. So it is a great place to start in on compassion. And there's loads of information there. You'll never get to the end of it. So that was the place I started. Yes.
Today, we're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health. From lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress to higher levels of happiness and even improved immune function, being compassionate is good for us in many ways. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. We're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health. From lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress to higher rates of happiness and even improved immune function, being compassionate is good for us in so many ways. Let's get back to the interview. Is there a science behind compassion and how it works within our body?
Yes, there is, and it's massive. So there's lots and lots and lots of research on this. So when so on the Charter for Compassion, there's loads of information, loads of things you can do. And when I was there, they were hosting webinars, which I think they still do now, which were free. And one of them I took was led by a doctor, and his name is Dr. James or Jim Doty. And he is a neurosurgeon, and he's at Stanford. So he is the founder of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford Medical School. And he received funding. He was one of the first, or very few, non-Tibetans who actually received money from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to develop a course, compassion-focused meditation. So they've lots of research on the go. So I was like, okay, I will go, I'll focus here. So I kind of moved away from the Charter of Compassion, not because it isn't wonderful, but just because there's so much going on. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got an individual who wins a TED Talk award, which is great ideas, and this won a big award for that. You got the Dalai Lama involved in it. You've got scientists researching compassion. So I guess the big question is, why is compassion important?
Well, that is the big question. So compassion is the desire to relieve suffering, and there is a lot of suffering. And I would say, from a medical point of view, unresolved suffering is a massive cause of illness. So that's my focus, that suffering, if it is not released in a healthy way or resolved or addressed, or I'm not sure what's the best term for it. The term that a lot of people use now is trauma. But I think to me, there's a lot of overlap between the words trauma and suffering. But trauma is an event that causes so much suffering that it overwhelms us. So basically, compassion is the antidote to all that. So actually, compassionate empathy, being able to generate compassionate empathy in our bodies, protects us from all kinds of trauma and helps us to heal and helps other people to heal. So that's my interest. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. It only makes sense to me that a physician that cares and understands what their patients are going through is able to offer better care, which makes perfect sense why yourself would do something like this and other physicians would be interested in this. Now, another thing I stumbled upon was what's called the golden rule. What is the golden rule of compassion?
So the golden rule is sort of like, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And we are a little apprehensive about that, because it kind of falls into the rule again, like, yes, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But the thing is, we're all different, right? So it's a simple example, I love cake. Yeah. My younger son doesn't like cake at all, right? So, for his birthdays, and I have friends who are really good cake makers, and I used to make cakes and so on, and like there was one year where this friend of mine had made a beautiful cake for my son, and it was in the fridge, and she was coming back and forth, and and she was like, I was like, we're just going to eat the cake, because he's really not a bit interested in this cake, right? And this year, we made him a beer cake, right? So the point is, like, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. We have to be aware of what the other person wants and needs and likes and all that sort of things. However, I feel safer when we go back way past the golden rule to the first rule, which is first do no harm. And that was a big part of medicine, primum non nocere. So I think as much as, and it's impossible to go through life without doing harm. That's just, if we walk on the ground, we're going to stand on insects, whatever. So I'm a fan of the do no harm aim.
I like that. And I think about some people seem to be more caring or compassionate just naturally than others. But is it something that's inherent to us as people? Or you just said you did a course and training in it. Is it something we can learn how to do ourselves?
Yes. So we can learn. And so the current idea from all the huge amount of research in this is that we are all born, or 99.99% of us are born with innate capacity to develop limitless kindness and compassion. Now, we do know that about 1 in 1,000 of us are born with less ability to feel for others, less ability to have empathy, and so on. So that's a whole other discussion. But 99.9% are born with this ability. Now, again, I kind of feel that the infinite stuff is probably for the 3% that Dr. Monroe talks about. I think most of us are in the group in between, where we can cultivate compassion and kindness. So the research shows that, it's like anything we do. It's something that can be grown. So we can improve our muscles. We can improve our capacity for compassion. Yes.
Yeah. And I think about, being compassionate. I feel like sometimes people have an easier time being compassionate towards others than we are to ourselves. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. Is that something you've run into in your practice?
Oh, absolutely. And myself.
Really?
Yes. So, and again, my friend, Dr. Mansouri, gave me the term on Monday, self-stewardship. So in May of 2017, I applied to train to take this course. And the requirements were, among other things, that one had to travel twice to Palo Alto in California. And one also had to take the 8-week course from a certified teacher before one could train. And at the time, there were no certified teachers here. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. So I sent in my application anyway. And within 2 weeks, I was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. So I had paid my deposit in US dollars, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to travel to Palo Alto. So I thought, well, this is interesting because this is a compassion course, So I sent them an email. I said, look, about breast cancer. So they got back to me and they said, yeah, because we were looking as well. And you have not, yet taken the 8-week course, which is a requirement. And, but, they said, we're just piloting teaching the 8-week course on Zoom. So I ended up taking the basic 8-week course that I now teach. I took it myself online, and I started it just when I was really feeling all the adverse effects of chemotherapy.
Today, we're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health. From lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress, to higher levels of happiness and even improved immune function, being compassionate is good for us in many ways. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. We're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health. From lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress, to higher rates of happiness and even improved immune function, being compassionate is good for us in so many ways. Let's get back to the interview.
Are people sometimes afraid to become more compassionate?
Absolutely. So you were asking me about the self-compassion, and another, maybe the most helpful word for that is self-stewardship. So starting off, I had never heard of self-compassion and self-kindness. You can actually do your score for how much you are afraid of self-compassion. So many people are afraid, if I become self-compassionate or self-kind, I'm going to just fall apart. I'm just going to sit and eat tubs of ice cream every night, or I'm going to drink too much. I'm going to smoke too much. I'm not going to exercise, whatever it is. Many people feel that they've got to be, pushing themselves, to keep it all together and to be any sort of a decent person. So so there's a lot of fear, and a lot of people are like, what? Self-compassion, self-kindness, what is this? Yeah, so.
Compassion feels good. Compassion's also contagious. Now here's a few tips from that Stanford University and Emory University compassion training programs. First, seeing yourself as similar to others increases feelings of compassion. One study shows that simply tapping your fingers to the same rhythm as a stranger increases compassionate behavior. Another showed that describing a game as a community game increased players' levels of cooperation and sharing behavior, while calling the same game Wall Street game made the players more ruthless and less honest. Number 2, see people as individuals. When asked to support an anti-hunger charity, people were more likely to give money after reading a story about a particular starving individual than after reading statistics on starvation. When we believe we're able to make a difference, we're less likely to suppress our feelings of compassion. And number 3, notice how good compassion feels. Studies show that compassion and compassionate action activate the brain reward centers. Research suggests that compassion is contagious, so if you want to help teach and cultivate compassion in others, the best practice is to lead by our own example.
Yeah, I think that's something that's, seen sometimes as being a form of weakness for people to feel sorry, for themselves or take a step back if they need it because they feel like they're not being strong. And that's something that's sort of toxic about the way that we live today. And I feel like the pandemic may have given people a bit of a chance to see what it's like to step back because they were forced to. Did you notice things like that with people where they became a little bit more mindful of being compassionate towards themselves?
Yes, I think people are very kind and very compassionate, and people went to all sorts of lengths to protect other people during the pandemic. All sorts of lengths. You saw it all the time, and all different people doing all sorts of things. I caught COVID in April, and I was quite sick, and I was sending emails to groups of people because just as I had been at events where people were present for the first time in 2 years. And it was that evening I developed symptoms. So I sent emails letting people know, I'm going to get tested. I have some symptoms. And every single person got back to me to ask, if I needed anything, so they weren't like, oh my God, we met, and I had been wearing a mask and so on, but I'm just saying their response was, do you need anything? And followed up to say how are you doing? Kindness and compassion overlap tremendously, but they are not quite the same thing. And when people are researching it, they go different angles. So kindness can be looked at the desire for everything to go well. And in different cultures and traditions and spiritual traditions, different words are used. So I think for the Abrahamic faiths, for Judeo-Christians and Islam, often we use the word love, right? So love is very important. And in other traditions, it's sort of loving kindness. In indigenous traditions, it's, kindness, the love of the creator. So anyway, so I think these are all terms that all are getting at the same thing, this loving nature. Mm-hmm. So love and kindness are the desire for things to go well. And there's a wonderful book called The 5 Side Effects of Kindness. And the health side effects of kindness are that if we cultivate kindness, we're happier, we have less cardiovascular disease, because we lower our blood pressure, our relationships improve, and we live longer. Now, of course, cultivating kindness is not going to help if we're some horrible trauma, we're hit by a bus or something. But in terms of preventing stress-related illness, cultivating kindness is very, very helpful. So, for example, people who have heart surgery are going to do better if they have a pet at home.
Really?
Yeah. So if and I'm getting a new puppy today, so I'm very excited. But anyway, so that was shown that people who had a pet did better, because I guess they were motivated to get back to that pet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. We had Dr. Carolyn Welsh on, and she's a researcher who studies the canine-human interaction, therapeutic role of animals, and very, very interesting stuff. And it is caring, And so I guess that brings us to what we were talking about today, which is, Be Compassionate NL. Can you tell me about what you guys do there?
Well, we're really just starting. So this came about because I was, as I said, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in May of 2017. And during that, I was also trying to train to teach this course. And you mentioned self-compassion. So I started the training in 2018, and I had never heard of self-compassion. I had heard of self-care and sort of scheduling time in your day to do things like exercise or walk or whatever else to look after yourself. But what was interesting, yes, of course, as a physician, it's very important to stay within, one's boundaries. So I was going to see, the registrar at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Newfoundland and Labrador to speak to her about doing this course and wanting to train to teach this course, and wanting to make sure that it was within, what I was allowed to do as a physician. So I spoke to as many people as I could think of. I managed to certify to teach this course, which is a course for a group of 10 to 28 people. And I certified in February of 2020. So Mike, I don't know if you remember February 2020, but we were right between Stormageddon and COVID, right?
Yes.
And so I got certified. And first of all, because of the weather, I actually did have my course. So the medical school had given me space for my practicum, and I had set up to teach my first course starting in March of 2020, and then COVID hit. Yeah. And so I was certified to teach this course in person. And of course, there was no way we were going to be teaching courses in person. So then, plus I was trying to find an umbrella of some kind to be able to teach this and to share information about the science, well, the art and the philosophy and the science and the theology of kindness and compassion. So that's where Be Compassionate NL has come from.
Today, we're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health. From lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress to higher levels of happiness and even improved immune function, being compassionate is good for us in many ways. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. We're talking about compassion with Dr. Frances Scully, who's a researcher, physician, and founder of Be Compassionate NL. She's sharing how being kind and compassionate is good for our health, from lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress to higher rates of happiness and even improved immune function. Being compassionate is good for us in so many ways. Let's get back to the interview.
So when you do your training with people, what does that involve?
Well, the course I am trained to teach is an 8-week course, and we ask people to commit to spending 15 minutes a day practicing their meditations.
Okay.
And to also volunteer 1 hour per week in any way they want. Any sort of volunteer work that's all volunteer work is compassion focused. Yeah. So you can do anything that is helpful, right?
Yeah.
And there's many things you can do to help. So, and then the course itself is an 8-week, 2 hours per week course. And there are 6 steps. So the first week is called Settling the Mind, which if anyone has done any types of meditation, it is literally just trying to, calm our mind and ways to do that. And the great thing about it actually is really there are 6 steps, or if you like, there's 6 meditations. And so people can stay at whatever level. So I give them along with a lot of information to the students, and then they practice, and then we get together again. So the second week we discuss like how it went and so a big part of the course, it's interactive and experiential. So we practice meditation together, and we also share our experience or not. So it's very, but that's why it's a group thing, and it's so important and interesting, and it's so helpful to compassion to start to realize, oh my, other people really think differently than I do. Because one of the reasons a lot of the time we all get so irritated. I mean, there are lots of reasons, but one of it is, we're going to do something and there's one way we're going to do it. And somebody else comes along and they do it a totally different way. And from our point of view, they've totally messed up. And a lot of the time we think that's deliberate. So part of it is the pause and then actually listening to other people and how they approach things. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. So the next week 2 is loving kindness for a loved one. Week 3 is self-compassion. Week 4 is, self-kindness and then self-compassion. So because self-compassion is so challenging for so many of us, there are 2 weeks or 2 different meditations devoted to that. And then there's common humanity and giving and receiving compassion. So so people do feel, okay, if I'm a kind person, people take advantage of me. Other people think, being kind and compassionate means I have to be a doormat. I have to just put up with anything. And interestingly, there's also fierce compassion, because fierce compassion is times when we have to say no and tell people, no, what you're doing is hurtful and harmful. And so compassion, it's a very active thing. It's not passive.
But it sounds like, there's a real level of self-awareness that is required. And then from there, you're able to foster this level of compassion. Now, not everybody may have access to a course such as yours, but if somebody's listening and they want to start to develop a bit more of a compassionate lens to the way that they operate in their day-to-day life, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say just what you're saying, like noticing, notice yourself, notice the people around you. And so notice, like put your, decide, just when you're going around your daily business, notice. And if you're focused on kindness and compassion, you will notice little things happening. Now, of course, you will also notice lots of things that are unkind, but just notice. And on the website for Be Compassionate NL, there is a resource section. And first of all, for anybody who lives in St. John's and who likes to read, as we said, I was planning to be doing all this in person. So I bought all these extra books to lend to anybody who was taking the course. So I have loads of books on all different aspects and at different levels of reading on kindness and compassion. So if anybody wants to borrow a book from me, they are welcome. So that's the books. Now, lots of people don't like to read. So on the website, under resources, I have curated lots and lots of talks and articles on a compassion focus. So, and on the Mighty Network, which is free to join, there are, I don't know how many, maybe 1,000 talks, different people, because it's innate to humans. So everybody, what you need and want for kindness and compassion, what I need are going to be different, but we all can do it and we all can learn always. Yeah.
Right. So if people want to learn more, they can reach out to your website and then, use some of those free resources that you have available to people and maybe get involved on a deeper level. A big question here. Okay. Let's just get a little bit philosophically for a second. What happens if our communities or our world becomes a more compassionate place?
Well, I think in terms of the natural world, there's something called the healing curve. And if people want to look that up, it's at UC San Diego. It's measuring the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if I do, I've tried to study, climate stuff, energy stuff for years, and I find it very confusing, but the healing curve is very easy to see. It's a straight, this curve going zooming up. So we really have to change our relationship with the natural world and with each other. We're at it, that the planet is at a tipping point. Now, how we're going to do that, and from my point of view, it has to be done with great kindness and compassion. And what a lot of biologists are teaching us is that actually living systems are mostly symbiotic. Now, I have a book on mosses. I don't know much about mosses, but it's all about how life really is mostly collaborative. So there is that phrase from the poem In Memoriam, written by Lord Alfred Tennyson, nature is red in tooth and claw. It's actually not accurate, because most of the time nature is nourishing, or there wouldn't be any nature or any life. Yeah. So we all have to do small things, but that's the thing. I think we have to start by loving nature and loving ourselves and loving those around us. Yeah.
I love that. And I think that's a very solid message for people to digest as we wind down here today. Dr. Scully, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today and sharing your story.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Scully for joining me today. Compassion comes from the Latin word compati, which literally means to suffer with. It's more than mere empathy and care. It's a desire to help someone who's suffering and to be able to help that person ease their pain. In a world that needs compassion more than ever, I encourage you to do more than just empathize, but to take action to make a difference for those who need help. Based on what we learned today, not only will the recipient of your compassion benefit, but so will you. The health benefits of compassion are undeniable. So next time you think about how you can improve your mood, your health, or your life, think about how you can help others in ways that you can make the greatest difference. Well, that's our show this week. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Wall. We'll see you back here next week for another episode of The Wall Show on your VOCM.